Hi, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you're joining from. I am Reena Dayal, and I'm your host for the Thought Integrator podcast series. This is a series which is focused on the latest stuff that is happening in science and technology and how it has the potential to impact society and humanity. And our topic today is a very interesting topic. It's on human life extension, healthy aging, and how is it going to impact the future of humanity. We have a very distinguished guest with us today, Professor Brian Kennedy from the National University of Singapore. He is a distinguished professor of biochemistry and physiology at the Yong Lin School of Medicine, NUS, Singapore. He's the director of National University Health System Center for Healthy Aging at Singapore. He is also a professor at the Buck Institute for Research on Aging, Navota, California, USA, adjunct professor at the Leonard Davis School of Gerontology, USC, Los Angeles, USA, affiliate faculty at the Department of Biochemistry, University of Washington, Seattle, US. So with all of those accolades and, to his name, he's also doing a lot of research in this space. And I'm very curious to get into the discussion. A very warm welcome to you, Brian. If I may call Professor Kennedy, I'm going to be referring to you as Brian during the conversation.
Brian, please.
Yes, thank you. And so the first question is, who is Brian Kennedy? And, tell us a little bit about yourself, beyond all these accolades that we talked about, and what prompted you to focus on human longevity?
Sometimes I forget who I am myself, so it'll be a good reminder for all of us. I went to graduate school at MIT, and when I got there, I wanted to do something crazy. And we decided that at that time, we were working on little single-celled yeast cells to try to understand biology. And we thought, what if we can study aging in these yeast cells? And that sort of got me interested in aging. I'd always kind of been interested in aging because I was the only young person in my whole family, and all the older people lived forever. Both my grandmothers lived to 100. So I was always curious about aging. And so then when there was opportunity came to study aging at MIT, I took it. And more or less, I've been working on aging ever since, just because it's a fascinating biologic problem. And really, it started out just trying to understand aging. I wasn't thinking about altering human life expectancy or anything like that. But as the things have changed so much, and there's so many more older people and so many more chronic diseases that they get, it's become clear that it's possible now to really alter how we age. And so that's my main goal at present.
Wow, that's great. And in 2017, I think you shifted from the US to Singapore. I'm curious to know what prompted the shift.
Well, Donald Trump got elected. That was one thing. I'm half joking. But there was a real opportunity in Singapore, because where I was in the US, there was a lot of great basic research, but there wasn't a clinic or a hospital nearby. And the National University of Singapore has a great hospital and great, basic preclinical research. And so the opportunity was there to put together a program that can, put the whole pipeline together: early stage aging research, translational research on aging, but then clinical interventions to see if we can really alter how humans age. And so that opportunity was too good to pass up. And, I thought it would be fun to be an expat for a while. So everything just kind of came together. So.
Okay, great. So, and you're sort of liking where you are and enjoying the work over there at Singapore?
Yeah, it's great. I had a secondary lab in China for a long time, so I've been traveling to Asia a lot. But if you're living full time somewhere, Singapore is kind of the shallow end of the Asia pool, because everybody speaks English and everything's done in English. And so I'm frustratingly monolingual. So Singapore works well for me, but I really like the Asian culture. I've traveled all over the continent, and so it's great to be living here, and this is really the center of the aging issue. I mean, Japan, Singapore, Korea, longest lived countries in the world, Hong Kong, and also very low birth rates. And so in Singapore, for instance, in 10 years, 30% of the population is going to be over the age of 65. So this is a aging is a major economic issue as well as a medical issue here.
Yeah, that's true. I think that's becoming more true for India as well as we move forward, right? I mean, we've always had a very young working population because of our population growth, right? But then the number of people who are aging is also adding up, and we're facing the same challenges as everybody else. And then some parts of Asia have not really looked at the problem as much, as seriously as, let's say, UK has focused on it in the past, and to some extent US as well. Yeah, so great.
Yeah, I agree with you on India, just to comment on that. I think it's changing rapidly, and there's even over the last couple of years, the number of people that are interested in understanding aging and companies that are focused on longevity in India has gone way up. So I think that it's happening everywhere. Look, by 2050, there's 2 billion people over the age of 65 globally. So this is a global problem. Some countries are experiencing it early and some later, but it's happening everywhere.
Oh, that's a huge number that you talked about, right? I mean, I don't think people even realize the extent this might, this is going to hit us, right? And then some of us will be there. I mean, at that point in time, really facing it, right? I mean, in that sense.
I'm planning to still be healthy at 2050. I don't know about you. So.
Same here. I'm going to, towards the end of the session, I know. So a disclaimer, right? Full disclosure. Everybody I talked about this podcast to was like, go into the science, but please have a section towards the end where we can get some tips on how we remain healthy. So I was like, okay, we're going to do that part as well, right?
Okay. I've been asked those questions before, so I'm ready.
All right. So, I think getting a little, sort of from the discussion on what sort of drove this interest in you, tell us a little bit about what drives the human body to age. When does it start, and what really happens in the body?
Well, there are changes going on throughout your life, from the womb to when you're born to when you're a teenager and when you become an adult. And really, there are changes that are happening that are not good, based on the time you live on Earth. And so you start to accumulate damage to cells and damage to molecules. But your body is really good at dealing with that. It either can repair the damage or compensate for the damage. There's networks in place in your body that keep you healthy. The problem is when enough things go wrong over time, then those networks begin to break down. And when they break down, then that's what enables you to start getting sick. And it also causes functional decline. It's not just getting sick. It's not, it's cognitive decline, it's physical decline. All of these things are happening as a result of the aging process. And so I think of it as kind of there's a systemic system that's keeping you healthy, and it just over time, it starts to fall apart with all the challenges it faces. And, I think that part of this is evolutionary, right? When you think about natural selection, it cares about fitness, which is basically reproduction. What's important is that you stay healthy, make babies, raise the babies, get your DNA into the next generation. Typically life expectancy, 100 years ago and beyond was 40 years of age. People were not living long enough to get old. They were dying from other reasons. And so there wasn't much selective pressure to keep you healthy very late in life. And so another way to look at it is that aging is kind of what happens when the evolutionary pressure to keep you healthy starts to decline. And there's no reason to keep you healthy till 80 if everybody's dying at 40. So I think that now we live in a different world where we don't have these age extrinsic causes of mortality, like bacterial infections, food security issues. Those still exist in some parts of the world, certainly, but they're declining. We can treat infectious disease better. There's less childbirth mortality. There's better water supply. These kinds of things are allowing people to get old, and now we're having this huge problem with an aging population, getting many different diseases, etc. So I think it's a great opportunity having people that are older, that are wise, and as long as you keep them healthy and empowered, and that's what we're trying to do. So.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, So in this whole context of aging, the body is always fighting something, and then at some point in time, the effects start showing. And has that shifted over a period of time? They today you talk about 40s is the new 20s, or 50s is the new 40s, and all of that terminology, and you can see people being healthier longer. But how what's the science behind all of this?
It has shifted. I think that overall we have a healthier lifestyle than we did 50 or 100 years ago. We're doing some really unhealthy things like right now, like eating too much, and there are a lot of people still smoking and stuff like that. But generally speaking, lifestyle is healthier, diet is healthier than it was many, many years ago. So, people are starting to, that sort of health extends, and people are starting to get sick in their 50s and 60s as opposed to their 40s. But when you look at two different parameters, one is life expectancy and the other is healthy life expectancy. So I call them lifespan and health span. Lifespan is going up faster than health span. They're both going up, but lifespan is going up faster. So what that means is that the medical system as it exists today is keeping you alive longer, but it's also keeping you sick longer. And I think the problem with that, the reason that's happening is we don't do good preventative medicine. We're not helping people stay healthy throughout their life course. We wait till they get sick, and then we spend a lot of money after they're sick trying to fix them. And that doesn't work particularly well. Once you have one or more chronic diseases of aging, it becomes very hard to bring you all the way back to health. So what medicine does is it helps you manage those diseases so you live longer, but you're not in a full state of health. And I think that the main message to take home from the aging research is that what we want to do is to apply our knowledge earlier in the life course. So work with people throughout adulthood to try to keep them healthy, to try to slow down the aging process so that we can extend that health span. If health span is going up faster than lifespan, then that's a huge economic victory because people are still healthy, they can work, they contribute to society, they have very low healthcare costs, etc. And it's also the big quality of life win because, which do you want? Do you want to get Alzheimer's disease and have it managed really, really well? Or do you just want to not get Alzheimer's disease? And I think that's what the promise of aging research is. We can prevent these diseases rather than manage them.
No, absolutely. I think that's a no-brainer. If diseases can be prevented, and what's the point? If the last 20 years of a person's life are spent struggling on a day-to-day basis, then it's not positive in any way, neither for the person nor for the people around. And there is, of course, like you said, there is an economic cost to living, and there is no joy in living. So I think it's the focus on preventive medicine seems to be growing now, though, right? There are a lot of health and wellness industry, in the last 2-3 decades. I think the number of companies that have come up in the health and wellness sector is, it has multiplied many-fold, right? We're talking about 20 times more than what they were like 30 years ago. So the only worry that I have is that when I look at these companies, a lot of that stuff is pseudoscience as well. Some of it is science, and some of it is pseudoscience, and some of it is bordering on spirituality. And I think at some level, a lot of these other things which make a person feel good about themselves, make them more interested in life and more energized, also add to the health parameters.
I agree with that. Mindfulness is fine. I have no problem with mindfulness. I agree, though, that there's a lot of misinformation out there. I think it was Mark Twain that said, be careful about health books because you might die of a misprint. And so and that was 100 years ago, 130 years ago. So and now that you're right, the wellness industry is really proliferated and it's growing, but it's kind of the Wild West, and so on the one hand, it's great. I think that empowering people to make their own health decisions and taking those decisions are not out of the hands of doctors, but sharing them between the doctor and the patient is great. I think we need to do that. We need to let people have more choices in how they want to go about managing their health. But that only works if people are informed. A good example is the United States right now. We have a significant portion of the population that won't get vaccinated. That's a bad health decision, for COVID-19. And so I think that you want people making their own decisions, but the key is that they're making good decisions. So we need to couple that with good education and help people head down the right path to make choices that are good for themselves and good for the public as well.
Sure. So coming back to the science part of it, right, there is this chronological, this biological age that, I was reading upon this area, and there's this concept of biological age versus chronological age.
Yeah.
Could you throw some light into that?
Yeah, your chronologic age is extremely well measured by your passport. That's how many years you've lived, basically. Your biologic age, though, is what we're more interested in. And I think that I don't have to convince people that people age at different rates. You can look at 5 different people at 50 years of age, and you can tell they're aging at different rates. You don't really need, the extensive analysis of that. It's observable. But it's been very hard to measure. And that's a problem, because we would really like to know which people are aging poorly and who's at risk of getting sick before they get sick, not waiting until after they're diagnosed with some disease. And in the last 10 years or so, there have been several different studies that have developed new biologic clocks that measure the rate at which people are aging. And those are great. They're not fully validated. The FDA doesn't recognize them yet. But I think they're really important, because they're it's beginning to become possible now to look at somebody, do some analysis, and figure out how well they're aging. And since aging is the biggest risk factor for practically everything, knowing how fast someone's aging is very important. And these clocks are also useful when you're testing the intervention. So say I have a pill that I think makes you slow down your aging or even reverse it. We need some way to validate that, and these clocks can be used for that as well. So that's a major breakthrough in the aging field over the last decade, is the advent of these biologic clocks to measure the rate of aging.
So how does that get measured? Is it like a blood test, or is it like your visual test? Because,
yeah, well, there are many of them. A lot of them involve blood draws. So measuring, the most well-known one, for instance, is the DNA methylation clock, or the epigenetic clock. And this measures methylation of particular regions of your DNA. And so you have to have cells for that. So originally that was done by collecting blood cells, PBMCs. But now you can do that with saliva, because you can get cells from your mouth, buccal cells, and measure the DNA from them to measure age. And so saliva is very convenient, because people can spit in the tube and send that in. You don't even have to go to the doctor for that. Mm-hmm. There are a number of other clocks, though, that are being developed, some of which require blood draws. One of the ones we work with is with a collaborator in China, and we're doing 3-dimensional reconstruction of a person's face, and we can predict their biologic age from that reconstruction, and not just their skin age. We're predicting their systemic age, the rate at which their body's aging. And that's great, because it's completely non-invasive. A person just has to stand still for 90 seconds to get that. So, but what we don't know is which of these clocks are the best right now, and how the clocks relate to each other. So, if I measure your age from the facial pattern, how does that relate to measuring age from DNA methylation or transcriptomics or your microbiome or whatever? And those are the kinds of studies that are happening right now to try to figure out how the clocks relate to each other and which are the best clocks, and also the most economic clocks, because we want to measure biologic aging in the whole Singapore population, or the whole population of the world ultimately. And then we need something that's economically feasible. We can't have something that requires a muscle biopsy and $10,000 a person. That's not feasible, yeah. Right? So that's true. So I think that the clocks are really changing the field, but they're not fully developed yet. I will say also that if people are interested, they can send in saliva to various companies and get their own biologic age measured. So if you look up biologic aging clocks, and you can find companies that will measure your age for you if you're interested. So.
Oh, that'll be interesting to try. I did try out some of these online uh, facial facial
Yeah,
analysis based software, and I actually what I did was, given that I'm from the tech sector, I picked up a series of my photographs from the
yeah,
last 1 or 2 months, so
yeah,
roughly same age,
yeah,
but different attire, different look, and one with the
yeah,
spec, one
yeah,
without the spec. And I got all ranges from 20
yeah.
years to 50 years, and it's like so I sort of gathered that that's not reliable in any case.
Yeah,
And
I think they're not. My opinion is they're not reliable. The one we do requires a special camera and 3 photographs and then a computer reconstruction. It's not the same as just looking at that. One of the things I noticed, if you want to use these internet-based things, is that if you want to be younger, get a camera that's not as good. If you're a little bit less out of focus, you look younger to the kids.
okay, that's a good.
Use your old laptop.
Okay, okay. So when we look at this problem of the fact that the age span is already increasing, and then there seem to be people who are working on, I don't know if you're focused on that, but there are other people who are focusing on increasing the lifespan further, right? And there's a lot of investment going in that
Yeah,
space. And as you mentioned, the lifespan and the health span are not growing at the same rate.
yeah.
So what are the strategies right now which are being worked upon? Where is the light? Where do you see the light in terms of, yes, it is possible to bring the health span to reasonable levels of the increasing lifespan, and what are the ways at a high level to actually achieve that?
Yeah, I think it's really, it sounds like common sense, but it's really a revolution in medicine because most of medicine is reactive. You go into the doctor's office and says, it hurts when I do that, and the doctor says, don't do that. That's reactive medicine, right? And of course, we need that. People are always going to get sick and we need to be able to treat diseases. I'm not against that. But what we don't do enough is proactive medicine, how to, and actually, I think that, we misinterpret a little bit Hippocrates is famous saying, he wrote this oath for medical doctors. And what people take away from that is first do no harm. But then they translate that to if it ain't broke, don't fix it, which I think is wrong because things are happening throughout your life. Just because you don't have some particular disease indication yet doesn't mean things aren't going wrong. And if we optimize your health, you'll be more functional now and stay healthy for later. And so I think what we need to do is be measuring how people are aging throughout their life course, or certainly by the age of 35 or 40, and identify things early and try to mitigate that aging process rather than wait till they get some disease and then be reactive about it. And I think if we can combine really good proactive medicine with the necessary reactive medicine, then we'll really extend health span, because what we're really doing with the proactive approach is extending the healthy period. The problem with this is that the world is full of clinicians that are well-intentioned, but they're not taught anything about aging. Most of them, they're taught to fix people when they go wrong, and then they specialize in fixing them in certain ways. And then you have a pharmaceutical industry that makes a lot of money off treating disease, and aging is not considered a disease, and so they don't spend money on aging, particularly to develop interventions. So everything is geared toward reactive medicine, and we need to change that. So the money that's going into the longevity industry right now, it's really, it's kind of going all over the place. There's some things I think are great, some things I think are crazy. But in general, what I think it's trying to do is really create that disruption. Figure out how to measure aging, how to intervene early, and how to bring proactive, how to go from sick care back to real health care. And I think that sort of disruptive approach is exactly what the medical field needs right now.
So, doing preventive medicine, taking good care of your health, eating the right kind of stuff, putting in the right kind of exercise, all of this can extend your health span, right? That's what I'm hearing from you. How much is the impact? Are we talking 10 years, 20 years, 2 years, 5 years? What does it look like at a very,
Well, Let me start by this piece of data. If we can extend health span by 5 years in the US population, it'll have a bigger impact than curing all cancer in people over 50. And the reason is that only a third of people die from cancer in the US. I don't know the statistics worldwide, so I'm using US statistics. Only a third of people die from cancer. And the ones that you would cure their cancer, they get something else and die within 10 years anyway. And so even curing all cancer only gives you a 3-year boost to lifespan and not even health span. So if we can push health span out by 5 years, the estimated savings in the US alone is $7 trillion by 2050. Because people work more, they're healthy, they don't have those high healthcare costs. So it doesn't have to be a massive effect to achieve a big economic value. And also just ask yourself, what would you pay for 5 more healthy years? I think that most people would say a substantial amount of their savings they would put toward another 5 years of health, right? And they could build their savings back up anyway. So I think that modest effects are big effects in this field. Remember, everybody on Earth is aging at one level or another. So I don't know what the magnitude of the effects ultimately will be. There are people that are talking about escape velocity and immortality in 1,000 years. And I think it's great to have these kinds of futurist thinkers out there that are kind of pushing the envelope with conceptually, and that's great. But I think in the short term, in the reasonable term, what people can expect is that we'll see modest impacts on health span and lifespan. So I think even with exercise, with diet, we can talk about these things later too, but with exercise, diet, managing your lifestyle, you can probably already get 5 to 10 years of extra health span on average. And remember, this is an average. Not everybody will get that benefit. Some people will get 15 and some people won't get any. But I think there's already benefit to be had. And some of the supplements that are out there on the market now, the data is suggesting that they can have an effect of maybe 5 to 7 years, which is pretty impressive. And then some of the repurposed drugs that are being tested may have similar effects or even slightly greater. So, I don't know that we'll get more than 10 years in the near future, but even if you just get 10 years, that gives you 10 more years to find something else. I think that 10 years is a lot. If we can get there in the near future, that's already a big gain.
Yeah, and then, when you look at that map, which talks about how humans' life expectancy is around the planet, I mean, there's a fair amount of variation already, right? I mean, you can look at places like Japan, etc., where there are a lot of people over 100. And then worldwide also, there are a lot of places where number of people over 80 is significantly higher than it was, say, 20 to 40. It is already moving along. What about genes? What is of course, locations are also correlated to people from the same gene pool overall. But then what is the role of genes, genetics in aging?
Yeah, let me come to that. Let me talk about the discrepancy first, just briefly. Okay. There is a wide discrepancy in life expectancy around the world. And even in the United States, there's a 15-year discrepancy between some counties in the US and others. And a lot of this is driven by socioeconomic status. So I want to emphasize this point. If we can find ways to improve the living conditions, the economic status of people around the world, this will already have a big effect on life expectancy. And so what we want to do, the last thing I want to do is widen that gap. I tell people that, we're trying to develop things for billions of not billionaires. And so, how do we do things that are economically affordable and scalable? I think that's important. But coming back to your genetics question, most of the data suggests that genetics contributes about 30% to life expectancy. So lifestyle is more important than genetics, although genetics is a factor. There is an exception, and that's centenarians, people that get to 100. These people have got the right combination of genes. And if you ask what they did, they weren't particularly healthy when they were younger. They weren't necessarily less likely to smoke. They still drink alcohol. They weren't like yoga instructors or anything like that. What they did is they chose the right parents, because if you look at their parents lived for a long time. Their siblings lived for a long time. So for most people, lifestyle is a bigger factor. There are rare combinations of genes that can allow people to get to an old age in a very healthy way. And we want to know what those genes are, because those centenarians only have 40% of the healthcare costs that people that only live to 80 have. And that's because even though they live longer, they don't get sick. What happens is that, like my grandmother at 101, her heart valves gave out. And she was living alone in her house at 101, had never really had that much done to her. And then her heart valve gave out, and within 3 months she died, which was sad, but I'll take that if I can have that for me too. So, if those centenarians often stay very healthy, and so their healthcare costs are quite low.
Yeah, one of my father's father, my grandfather, he died way beyond after crossing 100, but he couldn't hear a thing towards the end.
Well. Can't fix everything, but
you can't fix everything, right?
But nowadays the hearing aids and things are getting better, but he was probably very healthy, right? He didn't have a lot of different diseases or anything.
I don't remember ever him falling ill or taking him to the hospital ever. Yeah. So that's how it was. Okay. So I really, sort of want to catch on to the statement that you made around, we are creating this for billions and not for the billionaires. And, there is this, if you look at this whole area, there are people who are actually focusing on the billionaires and are not really creating solutions for the billions, because whatever you have right now is expensive, right? I mean, in terms of, and there's no pill as such, and there is some talk that there will be a pill which you can take and you can reverse aging. So 2 questions over there. One is, how big is this gap in the approach to research between these 2 different areas, different types of philosophies towards approaching this problem? And the second is in reality, are we close to a pill which can reverse aging or extend healthy aging?
Yeah, I think that, well, first of all, there are pills being tested. So, one of the companies I'm involved with, full disclosure, just had released data that there's a combination of natural products that reverses biologic age by 7 years, at least by this DNA methylation test. Mm-hmm. So I think the pills are coming. They're also, that's called alpha ketoglutarate. That's the main component of that product. The product is Rejuven. There's also NAD precursors, and then there's also repurposed drugs like metformin, which cost 4 cents a day and may extend the health span of people. And so there are economic things being developed. I think it's not all expensive stuff. That's the first thing I would say. Mm-hmm. But I don't really mind the private sector developing expensive things like stem cells and things like that, because we need to know if these things work. I mean, let's take mesenchymal stem cells as an example. You can get an IV of mesenchymal stem cells in clinics in various parts of the world now, and they argue that it will slow aging, and it costs a lot of money to do it. But the problem is we don't know whether it works or not. If it really reversed aspects of aging, you could develop a strategy to mass produce these cells and bring the cost way down. Mm-hmm. I don't mind having the people doing the expensive stuff, or that right now that the people that have a lot of money can afford, because at least we can test whether it works or not, and then we can figure out how to scale it. But we're focusing on the academic side, on the more I don't want to say cheap, but the more cost-effective strategies.
Right. No, absolutely, it makes sense. I mean, there's a lot of stuff which requires a lot of research in almost every area, which requires a lot of investment initially, but then once you know that it works, you can bring down the cost. So that makes sense.
Well, and let's face it, on all medicine, right? Rich people get it first. This is, and I don't think that's fair. And I would like, and what we're doing is to try to avoid that if at all possible, but that's often how things work. It's called capitalism. And the HIV cocktail is a good example. It was very expensive to develop. Originally, it was very hard to deliver to people. You had to keep things refrigerated and take different combinations of drugs at different times of the day. And it was very expensive. And it took, 20 or 30 years to, get the cocktail of drugs to many parts of Africa. And you can look at that and say, that's a disaster. We should have been helping those people a lot earlier, which is true. You can also say that if we didn't put all the money and develop the expensive products in the first place, maybe nobody would have been helped, which is also true. So how you balance those things is very, very difficult in a capitalist society. I think that I want to be an actor of good, trying to develop things that can go to everybody. But the truth is that, a lot of companies are going to develop expensive products, and it's important to know whether they work or not.
So now a slightly different question. For all these strategies that you talked about and some of the pills that you mentioned, do you try any of this yourself?
Yes. So first of all, I'm involved with this company that makes that product Rejuvent. So I've been taking that for about 3 years. Because I don't really think it's fair to sell things that you don't at least try yourself. So I don't take a lot of other supplements. And one thing I would say is that while I think it's fine for early adopters to take these natural products, it doesn't have to be ours. It could be NMN or nicotinamide riboside or other things as well. I would be careful about taking a bunch of them at the same time, because when we look in our animal models, we can often see benefits of one of these things. That's how they got developed. But when you combine them together, you get unpredictable outcomes. Sometimes they cancel each other out. Occasionally they are additive together, but I can't predict what's going to work together and what isn't at this point. So people out there that are kind of doing this aging hacking, and there are people doing this that are taking, everything that has been reported to affect aging at the same time. I honestly have no idea what they're doing to this.
It could be dangerous as well, right? There could be side effects.
Well, I mean, they're all natural products, which tend to be safer. But the idea that natural products are completely safe at any dose is wrong. And also, when you combine things together and challenge your body with lots of different foreign agents, you're right. You don't know exactly what's going to happen. So I think that if people want to be ahead of the curve and they want to try one thing, that's probably reasonable right now. I can't guarantee it works. None of the research has proven that yet, but the research is suggestive. But again, I worry about combining like many different things together.
Great. So now I'm going to move to a different set of questions. And ideally, these are more related to how this whole phenomena of increasing age span is impacting society. And as we try and solve this problem of health span, what does it mean to how long people are going to be productive for longer? How will that change the concept of families and careers in people's minds, right? Because everything in society today, and none of us is a sociologist here, neither you nor I, at least I know I am not, but It's a question I'm throwing out there because I'm thinking about, does this impact the way we are going to live on this planet, right? I mean, as these things, life expectancy of 40 years versus 80 years. And then if everybody's going to live beyond 100 and be healthy up to 100, how does this change the way people live their lives? And do you, when you do this work on the clinical side, do you get involved with these people who are more concerned with these aspects of society, and do they reach out to you? And is there some work happening in that space?
Yeah, there's work at NUS on productive longevity and as well. And there are also a lot of ethicists that are into this. Excuse me. And frankly, I think we need to have more discussion, but changes don't happen in a vacuum, and they don't happen that fast. Let me give you two examples. One is that even if there's noise in the background. Can you hear that? I'm sorry. Okay. So let me give you one example. So even if we stopped aging altogether, it's not going to be tomorrow. There's a lot of 150-year-olds around. It takes time, right? So this is an event that's going to change slowly. It's not going to be an abrupt change. So there will be time to adjust to it. I think also that, lots of other things. It's hard to say the world's going to look like in 20 or 30 years at the pace of change right now. So you're right. I think the social structure will be changed if people are living longer, but it'll be a gradual change and probably one we won't notice as much as we think we do. But you're right. Family structures could change. You might have your great-great-grandparents around still eventually. You might be expected to work past 65. I mean, frankly, when Roosevelt instituted retirement, the life expectancy was about 62 and retirement was about 62. So the plan wasn't go home and relax and play golf for 30 years. It was like, go home and die. So, things are going to have to adjust. Work time is probably going to get longer. And so, I think overall it'll be good changes, but there'll certainly be a lot of predictable and unpredictable changes that come with it at the same time.
Yeah, I mean, there is one change, for example, specifically, you can notice it in India a lot, right? I mean, if you just go back and look at 2 generations, you can see that there is a generation which only believed in a single career. Like you decide what your career is, you get into it and you retire, right? And there was hardly, anybody who did something different would stand out really well. But today, everybody realizes that you can have multiple careers, shifts in the course of the journey, because the journey is longer, you work for longer.
Yeah.
And the whole concept of the retirement age came in because mostly it was government jobs, right, earlier, and then in the private sector, and especially with people doing business, this doesn't make any sense. You work till you can, and sort of. So that has also changed the way people think, and this is a change that we've seen in a matter of decades, right? So I'm thinking that as there is more time for people to live their productive lives and do more things, maybe we'll see bigger shifts than we are envisaging. And yes, we are adaptive as a species. We are pretty adaptive, so we'll adapt to it pretty quickly. But somehow I feel that those changes will be bigger than we are thinking.
They may be, but I would encourage people now to think about multiple careers and think about re-education. And I tell people, don't retire. Especially if you're happy doing what you're doing, do not retire. Stay active, stay mentally active, stay physically active. And if you want to retire, find something else to do. Find a new job. Volunteer, focus on your grandkids. There are lots of good answers, but the bad answer is sit on the couch and watch TV. Staying engaged is one of the best ways to stay healthy. I have to ask for a favor because my computer is acting strange. Can I go get my battery? It was 100% charged like 20 minutes.
Sure, go ahead. Yeah, please.
Give me
I'm
30
sure we
seconds.
can all wait, yeah.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Sorry
Great.
about that. My computer's been acting up all day. I don't know what's wrong with it, but it's.
No worries. We're good. So I was actually thinking about, if you look at some of the developments on the CRISPR side, right, gene editing.
Yeah.
And then what kind of impact that is likely to have for human health, and not just health, right? I mean, we talked about genes playing a 30% role in longevity. And then of course, there's a huge question of ethics there, but theoretically it would be possible to just create people who can live longer, isn't it?
Well, I think, gene editing is becoming possible. It's funny because when I was in the 8th grade, I read a book about gene therapy and I thought, wow, that's what I want to do. I'm going into molecular biology. And that was 1980. And so we were a little bit ahead of the curve with that book, but gene therapy now is starting to work. And I think it'll first be applied to sort of monogenic diseases like childhood diseases, but it's certainly going to be possible to do for all kinds of editing in the future. And so there's a lot of ethical decisions that have to be made there too about what should be allowed and what shouldn't be allowed. But I think for the moment, it's a good thing because, we've struggled to treat a lot of these childhood diseases. And now I think there's becoming a possibility to have success with it. And, even the vaccines are a form of, gene therapy in a way. You're putting mRNAs into the body that are going into cells and making proteins for antigens for vaccines. So there's a lot of technological breakthroughs that are happening now. And so I'm really excited about gene therapy and also about cell replacement therapy, using iPS cells and making cells that are needed in the body to replace damaged cells. I think that's also becoming possible now. It's something that people have thought about for a long time. So, all of these technologies, I don't think technology necessarily is good or bad. The feature is, or what you need to do is to figure out what are the good uses of it and legislate that. But overall, I think that a lot of major breakthroughs are happening now, and we're going to see big improvements in medical care going forward.
It's still expensive though, isn't it?
It's extremely expensive. And, some of these therapies are hundreds of thousands of dollars right now. And again, scaling them, there's a huge, so part of the problem is that with the pharmaceutical industry, it costs a fortune to get approval for drugs or therapies. And so you might have to spend $1 billion to get your drug approved. And if you're developing it for an extremely rare disease with only 10,000 people in the world or whatever, you have to charge a lot of money to make a profit off of it. And that's unfortunate, but if you don't let the companies charge a lot of money, they won't develop the therapies in the first place. So I think we need to think about we really need to think about how we pay for medicine. Generally, the healthcare system in the US especially is really, perverted. It's 19% of the GDP on healthcare, and we're not even that good, and so unless you have money. And so I think that we need to really revamp how we think about treating people, because, on the one hand, a company that develops a really great therapy for a rare disease needs to benefit from it. But on the other hand, should you really ask somebody to pay $400,000 to get their disease treated? It's a kind of a conundrum, and I think we need to think harder about what the solutions are for that.
And do you think it might create, especially, I'm a big supporter of science and technology, by the way, and, I firmly believe that whatever is happening in terms of progress is for our benefit. And the responsibility is in our hands to make the most of it and not, and sort of stay away from things that can go wrong and understand the ethics behind it. And as the ethics conversation becomes important. But at the same time, it's important to discuss a little bit around, where the ethics comes in, right? So there are two questions that I have. One is more like a philosophical question, which could lead to an ethical connotation. The fact that nature intended us to live for a certain time on this planet, and the planet has a certain capacity to manage a certain, there's limited number of resources and things like that. So what happens when we have longevity and people live longer and population is growing? First of all, that has a certain impact. Is there anything else that can go wrong with this, the whole concept of longevity?
Well, I think the population thing is a little bit overblown, because what drives population is birth rate. Because the birth rate affects population geometrically, whereas living an extra 20 years affects the population linearly. And if you look at the longest lived countries in the world, they're the ones with the lowest birth rate. Japan, Singapore is a good example. The birth rate is 1.1. And so, we're not even at replacement numbers here in Singapore, nowhere near replacement numbers. That's true in Japan, it's true in Korea, It's true in part by being enforced in China, and it's happening around the world. So birth rate is coming down, and so I'm not sure that even more enhanced longevity is going to dramatically be a problem there in the population context. I think that I think that I think of things, it depends on what you mean by nature. I think of things from an evolutionary perspective. So, and I don't think that evolution cares about how long a species lives. What it cares about is how effective it is passing its genetic information on and competing with other, type species. So, if you have something like a human being or an elephant where it takes a long time for a baby to develop to adulthood and be reproductively active, you need to have a long lifespan, and so you engineer a system that stays healthy for a long time. A mouse in the wild lives probably 6 months, and if you put it in the laboratory, it only lives to 3 years. And that's because mice don't live that long. There's no need to make them live 80 years. Something's going to kill them before they get that far. So aging is kind of, I think, an indirect product of the environment an animal lives in, and how evolutionary selective pressure control fitness. So I don't think that we were engineered for this or that. I think that that it's not like written in stone. But I don't want to be callous about the potential impacts of having people live a lot longer. I mean, what will it do to marriage? Are people going to be happy being married for 100 years?
That's a good question.
Half of Americans aren't happy now being married. So, I think that, we may have to rethink a lot of different things with longevity. But, I still, I got into this debate with an ethicist at one point, and one of their arguments is that, there's only so many things to do. If you're healthy for a long time, you're just going to get bored at the end, you're going to outlive your life course and be bored. And I was like, well, if I have to choose between cancer at 70 and Alzheimer's at 90 and boredom at 120, I know which one I'm going for, so.
That's a strange one, actually, because one of the things is that, why would you get bored? You can learn new things. I mean, there's so much to learn. The lifetime isn't enough to learn everything.
I think part of it is because, we have this idea that as people get older, they stop learning new things. They stop being interested in it. They don't learn new technologies. And I think part of that is like a self-fulfilling prophecy. We tell people that as they get older, they're not going to be interested in things, and then we're surprised when they are not interested in things. But certainly, if you stay younger, I expect that your brain is still fast and sharp, and you're learning new things. There's no reason why you're not going to be. If you're healthy like a 40-year-old, you're going to be learning like a 40-year-old too. And so I'm not really worried about that either. I think that. We have to try to make the changes we think are good, and keeping people healthy longer sounds good to me. And then there's going to be fallout from that. A lot of it's going to be good, and some of it might make changes that we weren't expecting, and we'll have to deal with it. I tell people now, people complain about the technology that exists now, and I tell them, well, how many of you want to go back to the 1950s? And most people don't, so there are good and bad things that happen. There's scary things that are happening now, but I think that overall technology is a tool we can use to make our lives better. So
I think overall life is better for people right now than it was 50 years ago or 100 years ago. I would put it like that.
Yeah.
Generally.
So too.
Yeah. So what about now a slightly, not really a hypothetical question, but maybe a little further away. I mean, right now people are talking about the space industry is, sort of gearing up for these missions to Moon and Mars and all of that. Mm-hmm. And as people start living, even for short term or maybe slightly longer term on these different planets, different places, maybe spending more time on the space station, we already know that there are differences in physiology, that come in. And as people, let's say, decide to, spend a major portion of their life, let's say on Moon or Mars, that's going to happen at some point in time. Does the longevity industry get into those conversations and say, what will that look like? Is this going to be 3 different races? And
yeah, I think there already is some interaction even between groups that are involved in space research and longevity. They're already trying to understand if we can make people live longer, then they might be more tolerant to travel long distances in space. I think that was what drove the whole process. But to me, a bigger question to solve right now is, how does being in a low gravity environment or a high radiation environment like space is, how does that affect your aging process? And so a question that would be really interesting, and people are doing research on this now, is these people that go to the space station, do they have an accelerated aging process? We know there are already problems with bone density and other things in being in low gravity, but how is it affecting aging generally? And that's a question that hasn't been answered yet. And I think that's the first question to answer. Let's understand what the impact of space or being on a different planet maybe is to aging. And then we can also ask the question down the road, if we can really slow aging, can we help people travel further away? And both are interesting, but I'm more worried about the health challenges that space presents right now. So.
I think we're almost towards the end of our session. So I wanted to go back to the popular demand that people had. I think we've touched upon that a little bit during our conversations. But if you were to, if somebody wants like 5 tips on, what they should do so that they can live longer and be healthier, what would they be, coming from an expert like you?
Yeah, exercise. That's number one. And I think the most important thing is not what kind of exercise you do. Ideally, it would be something that has some endurance component that affects cardiovascular health, and something that has a resistance component that builds strength, like lifting. But the main part of all of these lifestyle changes is sustainability. So you have to choose ways to integrate exercise in your life that you enjoy, because frankly, if you don't like it, you won't keep doing it. So if you like walking, especially if it's brisk walking, that's great. If you like swimming, whatever, just find things that are sustainable and keep doing it. And I think that that won't only keep you healthy 10 years longer, it will also keep you more healthy now. So it has immediate benefit as well. Healthy diet is critical. And so I think one thing we can agree on is that the vast majority of people that have access to food eat too much of it. So cut your caloric intake down to what's recommended. The FDA has recommendations, for instance, but other people do as well. For me, it would be like 2,200 calories a day, but the average American is eating 3,800 calories a day, male. So reducing calories is important. There's a lot of argument as to what's the healthiest diet. I would argue that it's probably a balanced diet of macronutrients. If it's rich in vegetarian-based foods, that's probably very healthy. A little bit of that depends on how much exercise you're doing. There's an interaction between exercise and food, but a reasonably healthy diet would be high in vegetables, relatively low in dairy for most people, and relatively low in animal protein. And then managing your stress levels, mindfulness, things all factor into aging as well. So I think stress is so important. We all know people that we see them and they're stressed. You can tell they're stressed and they don't even know they're stressed because they're just used to being in that state. And so I think part of the challenge is understanding what's going on in your own brain, recognizing when you're feeling stress and doing something about it. And that's where I think mindfulness is so helpful. So I think there are a lot of things people can do now, but they take sustained strategies. You can't do something for 2 weeks and expect that to have a long-term effect.
Especially mindfulness has to be a habit, right? I'm a mindfulness practitioner myself. I also am a certified trainer, although I don't train other people. And I think just being aware, like you said, of your own self and understanding at a slightly more minute level what changes are happening as you face the world, how you change internally, how you react. That just completely changes the game.
I completely
how you
agree.
handle. Yeah.
Understanding what's happening in you is the first step toward changing things. If you don't know what's going on, you're not going to change it.
Absolutely. Yeah. And pill recommendations, right? Multivitamins people should have, and then the natural products that you talked about.
Well, first of all, the data on vitamins suggests they don't do much, but I think that's misleading. If you're really interested in these things, you should check your vitamin levels, figure out what's normal in your body, what's low, what's high. The things that are low, then supplement up to normal, but don't just take massive amounts of vitamins, because taking too much may have as much problem as having too little in some cases. So I think one of the reasons these big clinical studies don't work is they never measure and optimize the vitamins in an individual to the right levels. They just give everybody vitamin, and some people they don't give vitamin, and then some people they're taking out of the healthy range, some people they're bringing into the healthy range, and overall it doesn't equate to anything beneficial. So know your own micronutrients as well as your stress. And as I don't want to put shameless plugs in. I mean, we've developed this product called Rejuven. It's by PDL Health, and it has alpha ketoglutarate. I honestly don't. I'm not. I think it's available online. I'm not sure if it's available in India yet. We're working on that. But then you can also buy products like nicotinamide riboside and nicotinamide mononucleotide that are have promise as well. So you can look, if you look for sort of pro longevity supplements, a lot of things will come up. It's a little bit the Wild West. There's all kinds of other things that I think have less data behind them, but may work. So it really depends on whether you want to be an early adopter or whether you want to wait, and see another 5 or 10 years and see which things are working better than others. I think both decisions are fine. It's up to you.
So I think that brings us, any questions? That brings us to the end of our discussion. Very, very insightful discussion. I think we got into the science of longevity, looked at the social angle a little bit, looked at what's happening in the world from a longevity perspective, how things have changed over the last decades and centuries, and how things are likely to change as we move forward. We've also looked at, and then now for all of you who actually wanted to get the tips, we have the tips on how to lead a healthy life and add at least a decade to our lives, 5 years to 10 years, depending on how it works out individually for people. And it's been a great discussion. Thank you so much, Brian. It was very, very insightful. And thanks for taking the time.
My pleasure. Anytime.
Bye-bye.